Stop. At 35, the rules quietly change. Not on paper, not in public, not in the motivational speeches that promise it's never too late. The change happens beneath the surface, like pressure building inside a sealed chamber. Invisible, silent, relentless. For most people, the financial mistakes that hurt them in their 20s are survivable. You can recover from bad spending habits at 24. You can rebound from career confusion at 28. You can even reset after a failed business attempt at 30. But after 35, the margin for error compresses. This is not a motivational statement. It is a structural one. After 35, biology shifts. Energy recovery slows. Risk tolerance becomes emotionally entangled with responsibility. Social comparison intensifies. Fixed expenses stabilize at a higher baseline. So time, your most undervalued asset, stops behaving like an infinite runway and starts behaving like a declining resource. And here is the uncomfortable truth no one says clearly. Most people do not fail after 35 because they lack intelligence. They fail because they are running outdated financial operating systems. This is the trap. You were told that success is about working hard. You were told that stability is about earning more. You were told that if you save consistently and stay disciplined, you will be fine. But the economic structure does not reward effort. It rewards positioning. It rewards leverage. It rewards asymmetry. And if you have not built those by 35, the system begins compounding against you instead of for you. Think of it like physics. In physics, velocity is not about how hard you push. It is about momentum and mass interacting over time. The longer something moves in one direction, so the harder it becomes to change that direction. Your financial life operates the same way. Every year, you delay capital formation. Your required acceleration increases. Every year, you remain dependent solely on earned income. Your leverage options narrow. Every year, you expand lifestyle without expanding assets. You increase gravitational drag. Most people do not notice this shift until they feel something they cannot name. It shows up as quiet anxiety at night. It shows up when you realize your expenses no longer feel optional. It shows up when you compare yourself to peers and sense divergence. It shows up when retirement calculators begin giving uncomfortable projections. You may not articulate it, but you feel it. And that feeling is not random. It is structural. Here is what changes after 35. Time compression, responsibility density, opportunity selectivity, and most critically, compound math becomes unforgiving. This is why 3 specific mistakes become lethal after this age. Not inconvenient, not suboptimal, lethal to long-term success. Before 35, mistakes cost you time. After 35, mistakes cost you trajectory. And trajectory is everything. Most people believe success is a single decision, a breakthrough, a lucky opportunity, a promotion. But success is actually a curve. And curves, once established, are very difficult to bend. And here is the part that makes this dangerous. You can look stable and still be structurally declining. You can have a good salary and still be compounding backward. You can appear responsible and still be accelerating toward financial fragility. This is why intelligent, hardworking people wake up at 42 confused. They did everything right, and yet something feels off. This changes everything because once you understand the invisible system governing post-35 success, shame dissolves. You stop blaming yourself for not feeling ahead. You stop assuming you're behind because you're flawed. You begin seeing the architecture, and architecture can be redesigned, but only if you recognize the 3 mistakes early enough. Here is what most people never calculate. If you start investing seriously at 25, you have roughly 4 decades of compounding. If you delay serious capital formation until 35, you lose 10 of those years. Last 10 years of compound growth is not 10%. It is often 2 times to 3 times difference in outcome. And that is assuming disciplined investing. Now layer in lifestyle inflation. Layer in debt normalization. Layer in identity-based consumption. Layer in decision fatigue from career plateau. The result? A slow bleed masked as progress. This is the invisible system. After 35, your financial life is no longer primarily about effort. It is about structure. It is about eliminating fragility. It is about building velocity instead of maintaining comfort. And yet, most people double down on the exact behaviors that lock them into stagnation. They upgrade homes instead of acquiring assets. They upgrade cars instead of upgrading leverage. They upgrade appearance instead of upgrading cash flow engines. This is mistake number 1. But we are not there yet. Because before we expose the mistakes, you must understand something deeper. Your success after 35 is not about catching up. It is about strategic compression. It is about designing systems that allow a decade of stagnation to be outperformed in 5 years. And that requires a different mindset entirely, one that most people resist. Why? Because it demands confronting uncomfortable arithmetic. It demands admitting that stability is not safety. It demands questioning habits that feel normal. It demands identity shift. And identity shifts are psychologically threatening. Here is the paradox. The very behaviors that made you feel secure in your early 30s may now be anchoring you in place. The salary you fought for may be limiting your risk tolerance. The house you purchased may be reducing your liquidity. The lifestyle you built may be consuming your future capital. This is where the structure reveals itself. After 35, the game is no longer about participation. It is about positioning. And positioning is determined by asset ownership, income diversification, capital deployment velocity, cognitive flexibility, and psychological detachment from status. If any of those are weak, the curve flattens. If several are weak, the curve reverses. Most people will never calculate this. They will simply feel pressure and interpret it as stress. But it is not stress. It is math. And math does not negotiate. In this breakdown, we are going to dissect the 3 mistakes that quietly destroy success after 35. We will expose the invisible architecture behind them. We will quantify the cost. We will dismantle the emotional narratives that protect them. And we will build a strategic blueprint to reverse trajectory, even if you're already past 35. Because here is the final truth before we move forward. 35 is not too late. But it is the last comfortable exit. After that, the slope steepens. And if you're unaware of the system will compound without your consent. The first mistake is not what you think it is. And it begins much earlier than 35. There is a structural change that occurs after 35 that almost no one consciously prepares for. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not come with a crisis. It comes disguised as stability. This is where most people miscalculate. In your 20s, volatility is visible. Income is inconsistent. Career direction is fluid. Living situations change. Risk feels exciting rather than dangerous. Mistakes are obvious and correctable. By 35, volatility disappears. But so does elasticity. Elasticity is the hidden variable. Elasticity is your ability to absorb shock without structural damage. Elasticity is your ability to pivot without collapsing cash flow. Elasticity is your ability to take asymmetric risks because you are not suffocated by fixed commitments. And after 35, most people have quietly traded elasticity for predictability. This is not accidental. It is socially reinforced. You were trained to equate stability with maturity. You were conditioned to interpret fixed expenses as proof of progress. You were told that reducing uncertainty is equivalent to building security. But the economic system does not reward predictability. It rewards optionality. This is the first cognitive shift. Optionality is the power to choose. Predictability is the absence of alternatives. After 35, many high-functioning professionals find themselves in a paradox. They have never earned more. They have never looked more stable. They have never appeared more successful. And yet, they have never had fewer real options. This is the invisible financial architecture. Let's break it down structurally. At 25, if you lose your job, you downgrade lifestyle, move apartments, reduce spending, and recover. The cost is emotional discomfort. At 38, losing a job carries mortgage pressure, family dependency, insurance continuity, education costs, social reputation, and age-based hiring bias. The same event, completely different structural consequence. This is not about fear. It is about geometry. Your financial life is a structure made of fixed beams and load-bearing pillars. Every recurring expense is a weight. Every liability is leverage against your time. Every lifestyle upgrade is additional mass. When you're younger, the structure is small, light, flexible. After 35, the structure is heavier. If you have not reinforced it with assets, passive cash flow, and liquidity, the weight compresses your maneuverability. This is why mistake number 1 becomes lethal. Confusing income growth with structural strength. Income is a stream. Structure is a foundation. A larger stream flowing into a fragile structure does not create security. It accelerates collapse if the structure is misaligned. Most people never analyze their architecture. They analyze their paycheck. They negotiate salary increases. They celebrate promotions. They benchmark compensation. But they do not measure fragility. Here is a strategic declarative statement. After 35, your primary financial objective is not maximizing income. It is minimizing fragility. This is where the system reveals itself. Your fragility increases when fixed expenses rise faster than asset growth. Income concentration remains singular. Liquidity is low relative to obligations. Identity is tied to consumption. Career mobility decreases. Now layer time compression into this equation. Before 35, if you realize you made financial mistakes, you still have 3 decades of compounding runway. After 35, you have perhaps 25 years until conventional retirement age. And that is a 30% reduction in time. And compounding is nonlinear. If someone invests $10,000 annually starting at 25 with 8% returns, by 65, they approach approximately $2.8 million. If they delay until 35 and invest the same amount, same rate, same discipline, the total falls closer to $1.2 million. The effort is identical. The time variable changes everything. Now consider the psychological component. After 35, most people feel an urgency spike. They begin consuming financial content. They explore investments. They feel pressure to catch up. But urgency without structure produces reactive decisions. This is how people enter high-risk speculative behavior. This is how intelligent professionals fall into concentrated stock positions. Crypto overexposure. Illiquid real estate syndications, over-leveraged businesses. Because psychologically, they are trying to compress time. And time cannot be bullied. It must be engineered. This is why understanding the architecture matters before discussing behavior. Let's examine the structural shift deeper. There are 4 capital types that determine post-35 success: financial capital skill, capital network, capital energy. Capital financial capital is obvious. Skill capital is your ability to generate income at increasing rates. Network capital is access to opportunity flow. Energy capital is your physical and cognitive capacity to execute. Before 35, your energy capital compensates for weak financial capital. After 35, energy capital begins gradually declining, not dramatically, but measurably. Recovery slows, stress accumulates faster, sleep disruption compounds, responsibility fragmentation increases. This changes execution capacity. If your wealth strategy is dependent purely on hustle after 35, it becomes biologically expensive. This is where most people miscalculate again. They attempt to outwork structural weaknesses. Instead of redesigning architecture, they increase effort. This works temporarily. Then, burnout begins eroding performance, and burnout erodes income stability, which increases anxiety, which increases reactive decisions, which increases fragility. This is the cycle. This is why most people never escape. Now, here is the part that is uncomfortable. Many individuals at 35 are not behind. They are misaligned. Now, there is a difference. Being behind means lacking progress. Being misaligned means your effort is not reinforcing your long-term architecture. You may be earning $150,000 annually, but if 85% of it supports liabilities, your compounding engine is underfunded. You may have retirement contributions, but if they represent your only asset class exposure, your flexibility is limited. You may own property, but if it consumes liquidity and produces no cash flow, it is structural weight. This is not about pessimism. It is about structural clarity. And clarity eliminates shame. Because once you see the architecture, you stop asking, "Why do I feel behind?" and start asking, "What is reinforcing fragility?" That question changes everything. We are about to expose the first lethal mistake in detail. But before we do, there is one more invisible factor that must be understood. After 35, identity stabilizes, and stabilized identity resists change. The behaviors that got you here feel normal. The spending patterns feel justified. The risk tolerance feels appropriate. The career feels locked. And when identity stabilizes, transformation becomes psychologically threatening. This is why many people sense financial anxiety but do nothing radical. The cost of changing identity feels higher than the cost of staying stuck. And that calculation is wrong. Because stagnation compounds silently. In the next segment, we will dissect mistake number 1 precisely. It is socially praised. It is culturally rewarded. And it quietly destroys optionality after 35. Once you see it, you will never interpret income the same way again. Mistake number 1 is not laziness. It is not lack of ambition. It is not even poor investing. It is scaling lifestyle faster than structural assets. And after 35, this mistake becomes lethal. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Most financial ceilings after 35 are self-installed, not by failure, by upgrades. The house upgrade, the car upgrade, the school district upgrade, the vacation standard upgrade, the "we deserve this" upgrade. Each one feels rational. Each one feels earned. Each one is socially validated. But structurally, each one adds weight. This is where the invisible trap tightens. Lifestyle inflation is not new. Everyone knows about it. But the psychological mechanics after 35 are different. In your 20s, lifestyle inflation is driven by novelty and identity experimentation. After 35, it is driven by comparison and perceived permanence. Comparison shifts. Your peers now own homes. They host dinners. They take international trips. They post stability. And something subtle happens. Your baseline moves. Not because you are greedy, because you're calibrated socially. This is how the system locks you in. Let's break this down with structural clarity. Assume a professional increases income from $90,000 to $150,000 between ages 32 and 38. They upgrade housing, increasing fixed costs by $2,000 per month. They upgrade transportation, increasing costs by $800 per month. They increase discretionary spending by $1,200 per month. Net new, fixed or habitual spending, roughly $4,000 monthly. That is $48,000 annually. The income increase was $60,000 gross. After taxes, perhaps $40,000 net. The lifestyle increase absorbed all of it. Net structural reinforcement? Zero. On paper, success. In architecture, stagnation. This is the trap. Because now the individual feels pressure to maintain income rather than build assets. Their focus shifts from growth to preservation. Preservation mindset kills asymmetry. And asymmetry is the engine of wealth acceleration. After 35, your margin for experimentation narrows. If fixed expenses consume the majority of income, your risk tolerance shrinks automatically. Not because you are risk-averse, because your structure cannot absorb volatility. This is why high earners plateau. Not because they cannot earn more, because they cannot afford to disrupt income stability. The house payment is waiting. The school tuition is waiting. The insurance premiums are waiting. The lifestyle expectation is waiting. This is how optionality dies. And once optionality dies, leverage disappears. Here is a strategic declarative statement. Optionality is wealth's oxygen. Without it, even high income suffocates. Most people never calculate optionality. They calculate affordability. Affordability asks, can I make the payment? Optionality asks, can I exit without collapse? Those are different questions. After 35, the correct question is always optionality. Now we must go deeper. Why does lifestyle expansion feel irresistible at this stage? Because identity solidifies around achievement. You have worked for over a decade. You have endured uncertainty. You have delayed gratification. And subconsciously, you want proof it was worth it. Lifestyle upgrades become symbolic rewards. They are not purchases. They are validations. This is the psychological engine behind the mistake. The upgrade becomes a narrative. I made it. But here is the paradox. When the upgrade consumes future compounding, it reduces the probability of actually making it. This is where the structure reveals itself again. If at 35, you redirect an additional $3,000 per month toward assets compounding at 8%, over 25 years that alone approaches $3 million. Redirected toward lifestyle, it produces zero long-term capital. The same $3,000. Two completely different trajectories. Now multiply that across years of incremental upgrades. This is not about living minimally. It is about sequencing. The correct order after 35 is overfund assets, build liquidity buffers, establish diversified income streams, then scale lifestyle. Most people reverse the order. They scale lifestyle on projected income growth. Projected income is not structural strength. It is optimism. Optimism is not a strategy. This is mistake number one. But it deepens, because lifestyle expansion does not only consume capital, it alters psychology. When your cost of living rises, your cognitive bandwidth shifts. Instead of asking, how do I build? You begin asking, how do I maintain? Maintenance thinking is defensive. Defensive thinking reduces creativity. Reduced creativity lowers opportunity recognition. Opportunity recognition is how asymmetry enters your life. This is why intelligent professionals often stall in their 40s. They become excellent maintainers. But wealth requires builders. Let's introduce another structural concept: lifestyle lock-in ratio. Lifestyle lock-in ratio equals fixed monthly obligations divided by net monthly income. If this ratio exceeds 60%, optionality declines sharply. Above 75%, you are structurally fragile. Not because you cannot pay bills, because any income disruption becomes catastrophic. After 35, income disruption probability increases. Industries evolve. Automation expands. Corporate hierarchies narrow at the top. One age bias quietly appears. If your lifestyle lock-in ratio is high during these transitions, stress compounds. Stress erodes performance. Performance erosion reduces income growth. Income stagnation plus high fixed costs equals compression. This is how financial anxiety appears without visible failure. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. Most people believe reducing spending is the solution. It is not. The solution is structural reallocation. And that requires confronting a deeper psychological layer. Because lifestyle expansion is rarely about objects. It is about status. And status after 35 becomes more subtle, not flashy, refined. Neighborhoods, schools, vacation quality, professional circles. You're no longer competing loudly. You're calibrating quietly. This is the second layer of the trap. But before we dismantle status-driven architecture, we must expose something even more destabilizing. The real damage of mistake number 1 is not the spending. It is the loss of time leverage. And time leverage after 35 is finite. In the next segment, we will quantify exactly how lifestyle scaling destroys compounding velocity. And once you see the arithmetic clearly, the illusion of earned upgrades will never look the same again. We need to quantify something most people never measure. Not net worth, not salary, not savings rate. Velocity. Wealth velocity is the rate at which capital begins working independently of your labor. Before 35, velocity is optional. After 35, it is survival. This is where lifestyle scaling becomes lethal. Let's model two individuals at 35. Both earn $180,000 annually. Both are competent. Both are intelligent. Both have similar backgrounds. Individual A increases lifestyle proportionally with income. Mortgage, vehicles, private schooling, upgraded vacations. The fixed obligations rise to $10,000 per month. After taxes and retirement contributions, only $1,500 to $2,000 monthly flows toward liquid investments. Individual B freezes lifestyle at a previous standard. Housing modest. Transportation practical. Fixed obligations at $6,000 per month. That leaves $5,000 to $6,000 monthly deployable into assets. On paper, they look similar. Same income, same age. But structurally, they are on different planets. At 8% compounded annually over 25 years, $2,000 per month becomes roughly $1.9 million. $6,000 per month becomes roughly $5.7 million. That is a $3.8 million difference. Same discipline, same intelligence. Only structural allocation differs. This is not about frugality. It is about time compression math. After 35, you do not have 40 years. You have 25. And compounding is exponential, not linear. Every dollar deployed earlier multiplies disproportionately. Every dollar consumed reduces terminal asymmetry. Now layer velocity into this. If individual B reaches $500,000 in invested capital by 42, that capital at 8% produces $40,000 annually without labor. At $1 million, it produces $80,000. At $2 million, $160,000. Velocity increases non-linearly. At a certain threshold, capital begins replacing labor income. That is structural power. Where individual A never reaches escape velocity because lifestyle absorbs surplus before thresholds are crossed. This is where most people get trapped. They never cross the first million. And without crossing thresholds, capital never becomes meaningful. Here is the physics metaphor. A rocket requires immense fuel to escape gravity. Once it crosses orbit, fuel requirements drop dramatically. Capital works the same way. The first $250,000 is slow. The first $500,000 feels incremental. The first $1 million changes the slope. Below escape velocity, gravity dominates. Above it, optionality expands. Lifestyle scaling keeps you below orbit. This is the velocity collapse, and it is invisible because income remains high. Now consider another dimension: risk capacity. When capital is low relative to expenses, risk tolerance shrinks. When capital exceeds expenses significantly, risk tolerance expands. Individual B at $1.5 million invested with modest fixed costs can pursue entrepreneurial ventures, negotiate aggressively, change industries, take sabbaticals, or reject exploitative environments. Individual A at $300,000 invested with heavy fixed costs cannot. This is where most intelligent people misinterpret reality. They think confidence is personality. Often, it is structural strength. Security changes posture. Liquidity changes decision-making. Assets change tone. Such this is the second cognitive shift. Wealth is not about consumption power. It is about decision freedom. After 35, decision freedom becomes exponentially valuable because time remaining to recover from misaligned careers shrinks. Now, let's expose the hidden psychological distortion. When income rises, people unconsciously anchor to a higher identity standard. They believe maintaining that standard equals maintaining self-worth. This is why downsizing feels like failure. Even if it accelerates compounding, even if it expands optionality, even if it shortens the time to financial independence, the identity attachment blocks rational restructuring. And here is where mistake number 1 becomes self-protecting. The more you scale lifestyle, the more painful it becomes to reverse. The higher the house payment, the more ego is attached. The more exclusive the environment, the more identity is fused. So even when math becomes clear, change feels threatening. This is how intelligent individuals remain locked for decades. Not because they do not understand finance, because they cannot detach identity from structure. Now let's layer one more dimension: income fragility. After 35, career plateau risk increases. Corporate pyramids narrow. Leadership roles become political. Technological displacement accelerates. Your value must evolve continuously. If you're financially rigid, while your career is dynamic, stress multiplies. And stress compounds biologically. This is why burnout peaks in late 30s and early 40s. It is not workload alone. It is structural pressure plus time awareness. You begin calculating the next 20 years subconsciously. And if velocity is low, anxiety rises. This anxiety often leads to one of two behaviors: over-conservatism, clinging to stable income at the cost of growth, or over-aggression, chasing speculative returns to compress lost time. Both are reactions, and neither is structural design. This is why mistake number 1 must be corrected first. Without freeing capital flow, every other strategy fails. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people do not need higher income after 35. They need higher allocation efficiency. If you redirect even 15% of gross income toward asset acceleration, the curve bends. If you reduce lifestyle lock-in ratio below 50%, optionality expands dramatically. If you reach capital thresholds early 40s, the second half of life becomes leverage, not labor. But almost no one prioritizes this sequence, because socially, visible upgrades signal success. Invisible asset growth signals nothing. No applause for index funds, no admiration for liquidity buffers, no social proof for boring compounding. This is why most people never escape. They are optimizing for visible validation instead of structural dominance. Now here is the micro cliffhanger that matters. Mistake number 1 is powerful, but it is not the most dangerous, because even individuals who avoid lifestyle inflation can still sabotage success after 35. And that sabotage is psychological, not mathematical. It hides inside identity. It disguises itself as intelligence, and it destroys more trajectories than overspending ever could. We are about to dismantle it. If mistake number 1 was structural, mistake number 2 is psychological. And it is more dangerous, because structural mistakes are visible in numbers. Psychological mistakes are invisible in narrative. After 35, identity hardens. You are no longer figuring things out. You are something: a director, an executive, a specialist, a founder, a provider, a high performer. The identity feels earned. It feels stable. It feels accurate. But here is the trap. Identity after 35 often becomes more valuable to protect than capital to grow. This is where self-sabotage begins. Not reckless spending, not laziness, but unconscious defense of a self-concept. Let's expose the architecture. By your mid-30s, you have accumulated professional reputation, social positioning, lifestyle consistency, peer group alignment, predictable income narrative. These elements form an identity shell. And once the shell forms, every decision begins filtering through one question. Does this align with who I am now? That question seems harmless. It is lethal. Because growth requires temporary misalignment. Let me explain. At 27, you're willing to look inexperienced. You will switch industries, take a pay cut for learning, experiment publicly. At 38, that flexibility shrinks. Switching industries feels risky. Starting over feels humiliating. Taking a pay cut feels irresponsible. Launching something new feels destabilizing. Why? Because it conflicts with your stabilized identity. This is the trap. What do you stop making asymmetric decisions? Not because they are irrational, but because they threaten narrative continuity. And narrative continuity feels like safety. But safety is not growth. Here is a strategic declarative statement. After 35, your greatest financial constraint is not income. It is ego preservation. Ego preservation blocks repositioning. And repositioning is required in a rapidly shifting economy. Now let's connect this to money. Most high-functioning professionals after 35 anchor their financial identity to earned income. I make X per year. That number becomes a marker of self-worth. If income stagnates, self-worth feels threatened. If a pivot requires temporary income reduction, the threat intensifies. So instead of reallocating toward future leverage, individuals double down on maintaining present salary optics. This is how people remain trapped in plateau roles. This is how they tolerate misaligned corporate environments. This is how they ignore technological displacement signals. Identity preservation overrides strategic adaptation. And this is catastrophic after 35, because the time window to reinvent narrows. Let's examine behavioral finance. There is a bias called status quo bias. Humans prefer existing conditions over change, even when change improves outcomes. After 35, status quo bias strengthens because life complexity increases. Mortgages, family, social networks, community ties. Complexity creates inertia. Inertia reduces experimentation. Reduced experimentation reduces exposure to asymmetric upside. Asymmetric upside is where wealth accelerates. This is the system. You're not lazy. You're anchored. Anchoring is subtle. It manifests as, I'm too far into this career. It would be irresponsible to start over. I can't risk instability now. I should be past that phase. These statements feel mature, but often they are fear disguised as responsibility. Now here is the deeper psychological layer. After 35, comparison shifts from horizontal to vertical. In your 20s, you compare with peers at similar levels. After 35, you begin comparing upward. Who is ahead? Who owns more? Who exited? Who scaled faster? And when upward comparison intensifies, ego sensitivity increases. If someone in your network takes a bold pivot and succeeds, you feel tension. Not because you resent them, because their success challenges your identity story. And here is the dangerous response. Instead of re-evaluating your positioning, you rationalize staying put. He was lucky. She had connections. They took reckless risks. This protects identity, but it prevents adaptation. Now let's integrate this with money decisions. Identity-based sabotage often appears as refusing to downgrade lifestyle even temporarily, avoiding skill reinvention due to seniority pride, ignoring new economic sectors because that's not my field, dismissing digital leverage models as beneath you, avoiding partnerships because you prefer control. These are not financial calculations. They are identity defenses, and they compound. Let's quantify opportunity cost. Let's assume a professional at 37 has a stable $220,000 role, but sees technological disruption emerging in their field. Reskilling into an adjacent high-growth domain might reduce income to $170,000 temporarily. Short-term ego hit, $50,000. Long-term growth potential, exponential. But identity says, I have progressed too far to step back. So they remain. 5 years later, automation reduces their leverage. Income stagnates at $230,000, while inflation erodes purchasing power. Distress rises. Optionality shrinks. And now pivoting is even harder. This is how self-sabotage compounds. It is not dramatic. It is slow refusal to reconfigure. Now here is the micro cliffhanger. The most dangerous identity distortion after 35 is not about career. It is about status consumption. Because status consumption feels like confirmation, and confirmation feels like stability. But stability, in this context, is structural erosion. In the next segment, we will dismantle how status illusions quietly redirect capital away from compounding engines, and why intelligent professionals fall into this trap more than anyone else. Status after 35 is no longer loud. It is refined. It is subtle. It hides in zip codes. It hides in school districts. It hides in vacation patterns. It hides in restaurant reservations and professional memberships. It hides in who you sit next to at dinner. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The more intelligent and socially aware you are, the more susceptible you become, because you understand signals. And status is a signaling system. Let's dismantle this carefully. In your 20s, status is obvious. Clothes, cars, experiences. In your late 30s and 40s, status becomes coded. You signal through stability, through environment, through consistency, through the appearance of having it figured out. And this is where capital quietly bleeds, because signaling consumes liquidity. And liquidity is velocity. Remember this principle. Every dollar used to signal today is a dollar not compounding tomorrow. Now that statement feels simplistic, but the psychological layer is not. Status spending after 35 is rarely impulsive. It is rationalized as necessary. Not this neighborhood is better for networking. This school is better for opportunity. This environment aligns with our circle. This membership increases access. Sometimes those statements are true. Often, they are partially true. But partial truth is enough to justify structural drift. Let's analyze the system. After 35, your peer group stabilizes. You're surrounded by individuals with similar income levels, similar educational backgrounds, similar aspirations. Yes, this creates a social average. And humans calibrate to averages. If your peer group upgrades, you feel pressure to upgrade. Not because you are competitive, because social cohesion feels safer than divergence. Here is the hidden dynamic. Divergence requires psychological strength. If your friends move into larger homes and you do not, you feel subtle tension. If your peers escalate lifestyle and you freeze spending, you risk perceived stagnation. If your network travels internationally twice per year and you do not, you feel deviation. Deviation triggers identity discomfort. Identity discomfort triggers spending alignment. Spending alignment increases fragility. This is how intelligent professionals get trapped. They are not reckless. They are socially calibrated. Now, let's layer behavioral finance. There is a concept called social proof bias. Humans assume that if others like them are making a decision, it must be appropriate. After 35, your reference group becomes economically powerful. If high earners in your circle finance expensive upgrades, it normalizes leverage. If they speak casually about $1.5 million mortgages, that becomes baseline. If they treat luxury travel as standard, that becomes expectation. But here is what you rarely see: their balance sheets, their liquidity ratios, their stress levels, their concentration risk. Status signals reveal lifestyle. They hide structure, and structure determines outcomes. Now consider this structural equation. If two households earn $250,000 annually, Household A lives on $180,000 and invests $70,000. Household B lives on $230,000 and invests $20,000. Both appear successful socially, but after 15 years at 8%, $70,000 annually compounds to roughly $1.9 million. $20,000 annually compounds to roughly $540,000. That is over $1.3 million difference. The divergence becomes exponential. And yet, socially, both looked equivalent. This is the illusion. Status hides asymmetry. Now, here is where identity self-sabotage deepens. After 35, many professionals begin prioritizing perception of success over trajectory of success. Perception is immediate. Trajectory is delayed. Immediate validation is psychologically rewarding. Delayed dominance requires detachment. Detachment from status is rare, because status feels like safety. If your environment validates you, your identity stabilizes. But identity stabilization often precedes financial stagnation. This is why many 45-year-olds appear affluent but feel constrained. They have optimized for perception, not leverage. Now let's introduce a deeper psychological dynamic: relative wealth anxiety. After 35, individuals rarely compare against national averages. They compare against micro-environments. If your network earns between $200,000 to $400,000, that becomes your baseline. Even if national median income is far lower, your perception of average shifts upward. This upward baseline creates artificial pressure. Artificial pressure creates overextension, and structural overextension reduces resilience. This is the system. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. Even if you resist lifestyle inflation and status signaling, even if you maintain disciplined investing, there is a third layer of mistake number 2 that quietly destroys success after 35. It is emotional spending, but not in the impulsive sense, in the identity regulation sense, and it operates beneath awareness. In the next segment, we will expose how emotional regulation through spending alters long-term wealth curves, and why professionals who believe they are rational are the most vulnerable. This is the layer almost no one sees, because it hides behind intelligence. After 35, most professionals believe they are financially rational. They budget. They invest. They avoid obvious impulse purchases. They understand compounding. They read financial content. They are not reckless. And yet, Something keeps pulling capital away from acceleration. It is not ignorance. It is emotional regulation. Here is the uncomfortable truth. After 35, spending often becomes a psychological stabilizer, not a transaction, a regulator. Let's unpack this carefully. At 35 and beyond, life complexity increases dramatically. One, career pressure intensifies. Leadership responsibility expands. Family logistics multiply. Health awareness rises. Aging parents enter the equation. Decision volume explodes. And cognitive fatigue becomes chronic. Cognitive fatigue demands relief. Relief can come through rest, through exercise, through strategic detachment, or through consumption. Consumption is the fastest regulator. It requires no restructuring, no deep reflection, no systemic redesign, just a transaction. And the transaction produces dopamine. Not excessive dopamine, just enough. Enough to signal, you are okay. Now here is where the trap forms. High-functioning professionals rarely engage in reckless consumption. They engage in justified consumption. Upgraded kitchen because we cook more now. Premium gym membership because health matters. Higher-end clothing because professional presence matters. Luxury travel because we deserve experiences. These statements are not false. They are emotionally charged. They regulate stress. They reward endurance. They reinforce identity. But cumulatively, they redirect velocity. Let's analyze the system through energy economics. After 35, your mental bandwidth is finite. If your work drains you, your brain seeks recovery. The cheapest long-term recovery is strategic rest. The fastest short-term recovery is spending. Spending produces immediate emotional relief. It creates a micro-celebration. It creates a sense of control. It creates a feeling of progress, even if no structural progress occurred. This is emotional substitution, substituting financial progress with consumption validation. Now layer in identity reinforcement. If you view yourself as successful, your environment must reflect it. If stress challenges your confidence, upgrading your environment reasserts it. The spending becomes identity armor, and armor is heavy. This is where intelligent people sabotage silently. They do not overspend recklessly. They over-reward subtly. And subtle over-reward, compounded over decades, destroys asymmetry. Let's quantify. If a professional increases discretionary lifestyle spending by $1,500 monthly as stress reward, that is $18,000 annually. At 8% compounded over 25 years, that single pattern costs approximately $1.3 million in future capital. One pattern. Now multiply across premium services. One, frequent dining, incremental home improvements, luxury substitutions for standard goods, frequent short-term indulgences, none individually destructive, collectively exponential. This is why wealth curves diverge quietly, not because of catastrophic mistakes, because of regulated comfort. Comfort compounds backward. Now here is the deeper behavioral mechanism. There is a bias called hedonic adaptation. Humans normalize improvements rapidly. The upgraded home becomes baseline. The premium service becomes standard. The luxury becomes expected. And once baseline shifts, reverting feels like loss. Loss aversion is powerful. Humans feel loss approximately twice as intensely as equivalent gain. So even if cutting $2,000 monthly accelerates long-term wealth massively, the emotional discomfort feels disproportionate. Therefore, spending persists. Not from ignorance, from aversion to regression. This is the emotional architecture of stagnation. Now consider something even more subtle. After 35, people often begin experiencing invisible time awareness. They sense that life is finite. They begin thinking in decades rather than possibilities. This awareness can create urgency, and urgency can trigger enjoy now rationalization. We worked hard. We should enjoy it. Again, not irrational. But without structure, enjoyment consumes acceleration. And acceleration is required to create freedom later. Here is the strategic reframing. Enjoyment is not the enemy. Consequence is everything. If enjoyment expands before escape velocity is reached, it delays freedom. If enjoyment expands after escape velocity, it amplifies freedom. Most people reverse the order. They celebrate too early. They stabilize too early. They declare arrival before crossing thresholds. And thresholds matter. Remember the rocket. Below orbital escape velocity, gravity dominates. Above it, physics changes. To most professionals after 35 are operating below escape velocity while living as if they have crossed it. This is the illusion. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. Even if you eliminate lifestyle inflation, even if you detach from status signaling, even if you regulate stress without consumption, there is still a structural force working quietly against you after 35. It is mathematical. It is unforgiving. And it punishes delay more harshly than any psychological bias. Or in the next section, we will break down the arithmetic of time compression, capital thresholds, and why the math becomes brutal after 35 if you do not deliberately engineer compounding. Because mistake number 3 is not emotional. It is exponential. And it is the most misunderstood of them all. This is where emotion ends, and arithmetic begins. Mistake number 3 is not spending. It is not ego. It is not status. It is underestimating the brutality of exponential math after 35. Before 35, time hides mistakes. After 35, time exposes them. And most people have no idea how aggressive compounding truly is, both for and against them. Let's begin with a strategic declaration. Compounding does not care about effort. It cares about duration and magnitude. Duration shrinks after 35. Magnitude must increase to compensate. And most people do neither. They maintain the same contribution habits they had at 28, while believing maturity alone guarantees outcomes. It does not. Now let's quantify this without distortion. Assume 2 individuals. Person A begins investing seriously at age 25. Person B begins at age 35. Both invest $25,000 annually. Both earn an average 8% return. At age 65, Person A accumulates approximately $3.4 million. Person B accumulates approximately $1.3 million. The difference is over $2 million. Yes, same behavior, same discipline, same return. Only one variable changed: time. 10 lost years cost $2 million. Now pause. That is not a motivational exaggeration. That is mechanical reality. Now here is where it becomes uncomfortable. Most professionals at 35 are not starting fresh. They often have modest retirement accounts, maybe $150,000, maybe $250,000. They assume that continued moderate contributions will work out. But here is the math they rarely run. If you have $200,000 invested at 35 and contribute $20,000 annually at 8%, by 65, you reach roughly $2.7 million. Sounds solid. But inflation-adjusted purchasing power changes the picture. At 3% inflation over 30 years, $2.7 million future dollars equate to roughly $1.3 million in today's terms. That may not sustain the lifestyle you're currently maintaining, especially if lifestyle has scaled. This is where the illusion breaks. You're not calculating in real terms. You're calculating in nominal comfort. Now let's escalate. After 35, your contribution rate must rise significantly to compensate for lost compounding years. This is non-negotiable. If you want to replicate the outcome of someone who started 10 years earlier, you must contribute nearly double annually. Double. Not slightly more, not incrementally more, or exponentially more. This is the math penalty of delay. Now here is the second exponential reality. Expenses compound too. Healthcare inflation historically outpaces general inflation. Education costs escalate faster than CPI. Housing in desirable regions often appreciates faster than wage growth. Your liabilities are compounding. If your assets are not compounding faster than liabilities, you're drifting backward, even if net worth rises nominally. This is the silent erosion. Yes, now let's introduce capital thresholds. Capital behaves differently at different magnitudes. Below $100,000 invested, growth feels invisible. Below $250,000, returns feel incremental. Below $500,000, passive income feels negligible. Above $1 million, compounding becomes psychologically tangible. At $1 million, 8% produces $80,000 annually. That is meaningful. At $2 million, $160,000 annually. Now, labor becomes optional. But here is the brutal truth. Most professionals after 35 never cross $1 million until their late 50s. By then, the freedom window narrows. This is the structural problem. If you cross $1 million by 42 instead of 52, your trajectory shifts radically. But crossing that threshold requires aggressive capital deployment between 35 and 45, which most people avoid because they are stabilizing lifestyle, because they are protecting identity, because they are underestimating exponential math. This is the trap. Now let's model velocity escalation. Assume at age 35, you commit to contributing $60,000 annually instead of $25,000. Aggressive? Yes. Necessary for compression? Often. At 8%, by age 45, you accumulate roughly $900,000 to $1 million. By 50, approximately $1.7 to $2 million. Now, capital itself begins generating six figures annually. This creates optionality. Without aggressive contribution early in this decade, but velocity never ignites. And without velocity, you remain dependent on labor indefinitely. This is the system. Time compression demands capital aggression, not reckless speculation, structured acceleration. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. Even individuals who understand compounding often miscalculate one more critical variable. It is not just how much you invest, it is where you invest. Asset allocation after 35 becomes more strategic, not less. And the wrong allocation can erase years of disciplined contributions. In the next segment, we will dismantle capital allocation frameworks, risk modeling, and the hidden asymmetry windows that exist uniquely in the 35 to 45 age range. Because compounding is not enough. Velocity must be directed. Understanding exponential math is the first layer. Directing it correctly is the second. Because after 35, the game is no longer about simply investing consistently. Or it is about reaching capital thresholds fast enough to alter your trajectory. This is where most disciplined savers fail. They contribute steadily. They diversify conventionally. They follow broad allocation models designed for stability, not acceleration. And they wake up at 52 realizing they have been playing a defensive game during an offensive decade. This is the structural miscalculation. The 35 to 45 window is not for preservation. It is for ignition. Let's dissect this carefully. Capital behaves differently at scale. At $100,000 invested, 8% returns produce $8,000 annually. At $500,000, $40,000 annually. At $1 million, $80,000 annually. At $2 million, $160,000 annually. Notice something. The effort required to move from $100,000 to $500,000 feels massive. The effort to move from $1 million to $2 million feels smaller relative to output. This is exponential slope shift. Your objective after 35 is to reach the first major inflection point as quickly as structurally possible. Most professionals miscalculate here. They shift to conservative asset allocation too early. They increase bond exposure prematurely. They overweight safety because responsibility feels heavier. But safety without scale traps you in mediocrity. Let me clarify. Risk management is essential. Recklessness is destructive. But excessive conservatism during the ignition decade is equally destructive. This is where the structure reveals itself. Your 30s and early 40s are often your peak earning years. Skill capital is high. Energy capital is still strong. Network capital is expanding. If you underdeploy financial capital during this window, you waste asymmetry. Asymmetry is where upside significantly outweighs downside. After 35, one asymmetry often exists in skill stacking into adjacent high-growth sectors, strategic equity in private ventures, ownership stakes rather than salary increments, scalable digital leverage models, real estate with strong cash flow and demographic tailwinds. But here is the tension. Asymmetry requires discomfort, and discomfort conflicts with stabilized identity. This is why most people default to market indexing alone, and hope time compensates. Indexing is powerful. But if you began late, indexing alone may not compress enough. Now let's model this numerically. Assume at 35 you have $250,000 invested. If you leave it in a conservative 5% blended allocation and contribute $25,000 annually, by 50 you may reach approximately $900,000 to $1 million. Respectable. But if you deploy a structured 8 to 10% long-term expected allocation with diversified growth exposure and increase contributions to $50,000 annually, the 15-year outcome could exceed $1.8 to $2 million. That difference is not marginal. It changes optionality entirely. Now, let's introduce velocity stacking. Velocity stacking is when multiple compounding engines operate simultaneously. Retirement accounts compounding tax-advantaged, brokerage accounts compounding flexibly, cash-flowing assets generating reinvestable income, equity stakes appreciating, skill capital increasing earning power. Most professionals rely on a single engine, retirement accounts. One engine rarely produces ignition fast enough. You need at least 2 active engines during the 35 to 45 decade. Preferably 3. This is not complexity for its own sake. It is risk dispersion through growth concentration. Now, here is the second structural shift. After 35, your risk profile should become bifurcated, not uniform. What does that mean? Core capital should be disciplined and diversified. Satellite capital should pursue asymmetry. Instead, most people apply uniform conservatism across all capital. This caps upside. Here is an example. Portfolio: 70% diversified index exposure, on 20% targeted growth or sector concentration aligned with macro shifts, 10% asymmetric opportunities, private equity, startup exposure, skill-based ventures. This creates controlled acceleration, not gambling. Structured leverage. Now let's address leverage carefully. Leverage after 35 must be intentional, not emotional. Leverage amplifies returns. It also amplifies fragility. If lifestyle lock-in ratio is high, leverage becomes dangerous. If fixed costs are controlled and liquidity strong, leverage becomes strategic. This is why mistake number 1 must be corrected first. Without structural flexibility, leverage destroys. With flexibility, leverage compresses time. Now here is the micro cliffhanger. Even if you allocate correctly, even if you increase contributions, even if you pursue asymmetry. There is one more exponential reality that blindsides professionals after 35. It is not investment returns. It is opportunity decay. Opportunity decay accelerates with age if positioning does not evolve. And most people never measure opportunity half-life. In the next segment, we will quantify opportunity decay, skill obsolescence curves, and why maintaining static expertise after 35 is one of the most expensive mistakes in modern economic history. Because wealth is not just about capital compounding, it is about relevance compounding. Compounding works in two directions. Capital compounds. Obsolescence compounds. After 35, both are accelerating simultaneously. Most professionals focus on investment returns. Very few measure opportunity decay. Opportunity decay is the reduction in future earning potential caused by failing to evolve positioning in time. It is silent. It does not announce itself. It does not show up in your paycheck immediately. It shows up in slope. And slope determines destiny. Let's define something critical. Every skill has a half-life. In physics, half-life is the time required for a substance to lose half its potency. In modern economics, skill half-life is the time required for your expertise to lose half its market relevance. For technical roles, half-life may be 5 to 7 years. For managerial roles, perhaps 8 to 10 years. For specialized niches, even shorter. If you do not actively renew skill capital, your earning trajectory flattens, even if income remains stable temporarily. Now, combine this with time compression after 35. If your income plateaus at 38 due to skill stagnation and inflation continues at 3 to 4%, your real earning power declines every year. This is erosion masked as stability. Now layer lifestyle lock-in from mistake number 1. Expenses high. Capital moderate. Income plateaued. Optionality shrinking. This is how the trap tightens. Now let's model opportunity decay numerically. Assume at 35, you earn $200,000. Without skill reinvention, your income grows at 2% annually, barely above inflation. By 50, your income reaches roughly $270,000 nominal. Adjusted for inflation, real growth minimal. Now assume you actively stack skills into a high-growth adjacent domain and increase earning trajectory to 6% annually. By 50, income approaches roughly $480,000. The difference is over $200,000 annually. That differential, if invested at high rates during your 40s, compounds dramatically. Opportunity decay is not about job loss. It is about slope decay. Slope decay is lethal after 35 because remaining runway is limited. Now, here is the strategic reality. After 35, skill capital often becomes more important than financial capital because financial capital requires surplus. Surplus requires income growth. Income growth requires relevance, and relevance requires evolution. Most professionals misinterpret experience as protection. Experience without adaptation becomes inertia. Inertia reduces opportunity flow. Opportunity flow determines asymmetry access. This is the structure. Now let's introduce another dimension. Network entropy. Network entropy is the gradual weakening of opportunity-rich connections due to stagnation. If you remain in the same professional orbit for a decade without strategic expansion, your network becomes redundant. Redundant networks recycle the same opportunities. Innovative networks introduce asymmetric ones. After 35, expanding network capital requires intention. You no longer accidentally meet opportunity. You must design exposure. Most people do not. They assume seniority will generate leverage. Sometimes it does. Often it caps it. Now integrate this with capital velocity. If your income stagnates, contribution capacity stagnates. If contribution capacity stagnates, capital thresholds delay. If thresholds delay, optionality shrinks. If optionality shrinks, risk tolerance declines. If risk tolerance declines, innovation decreases, and the cycle compounds. This is how intelligent professionals quietly plateau for decades. Not due to failure, due to unmeasured decay. Now let's introduce the third exponential dynamic: energy depreciation. After 35, energy recovery declines gradually. If you depend entirely on high output effort to generate income, your earning model becomes biologically fragile. If you have not built systems or scalable income streams by early 40s, burnout probability rises sharply. Burnout is not weakness. It is system overload. And burnout during peak earning years is financially catastrophic, because recovery time consumes compounding time. This is why the 35 to 45 decade is strategic ignition, not maintenance, not stabilization. Ignition. Like now, here is the micro cliffhanger that matters. Many people understand skill reinvention conceptually. They read about it. They attend seminars. They take courses. But they fail to integrate skill capital into wealth architecture. They treat skill growth as career growth, not asset growth. And that distinction is the final hidden lever. In the next section, we will dismantle why intelligent, capable professionals still fail after 35, even when they understand the math. Because knowledge is not positioning, and positioning requires deliberate structural reconfiguration. By now, the arithmetic is clear. Lifestyle inflation erodes velocity. Identity preservation blocks repositioning. Exponential math punishes delay. Opportunity decay compounds silently. So here is the uncomfortable question. If intelligent professionals understand most of this, why do they still plateau? Why do capable, disciplined, highly educated individuals in their late 30s and 40s feel stuck despite awareness? The answer is structural friction. And structural friction increases with intelligence. This sounds counterintuitive. It is not. Let's break it down. Intelligent people build complex lives. Complex lives create dense structures. Dense structures resist change. After 35, life architecture typically includes mortgage or long-term housing commitment, family responsibility, career specialization, geographic anchoring, social ecosystem, financial obligations, identity narrative. Each of these components is a stabilizer. Stabilizers are good for predictability, but they reduce agility. Agility is the ability to pivot without collapse. Without agility, knowledge remains theoretical. You can understand compounding perfectly and still be trapped by structure. This is the first friction point. Now let's examine decision fatigue economics. After 35, daily decision load increases exponentially. Leadership roles require constant micro-decisions. Family logistics require scheduling decisions. Health awareness introduces diet and wellness decisions. Financial planning introduces risk allocation decisions. Every decision consumes cognitive bandwidth. The cognitive bandwidth is finite. When bandwidth is depleted, humans default to status quo. Status quo favors maintenance. Maintenance protects identity. Maintenance delays reinvention. This is how intelligent professionals stall, not from ignorance, but from exhaustion. And exhaustion favors safety. Safety slows growth. Now layer social programming. From childhood through early adulthood, society programs linear progression. Study to graduate, to work, to promote, to stabilize, to scale lifestyle. But very few are trained in non-linear capital engineering. Very few are trained to view income as raw material rather than destination. Very few are trained to treat their 30s as ignition phase rather than consolidation phase. So when professionals reach 35, the social narrative whispers, "You've made it. Stability is success. Now protect what you built." Protection mindset is defensive. Defense does not produce asymmetry. It preserves baseline. And baseline preservation is the beginning of plateau. This is the invisible cultural trap. Now let's examine lifestyle inflation psychology more deeply. Lifestyle inflation is not only about spending, it is about environment reinforcement. Your environment influences behavior. If you move into a higher consumption environment, your exposure to higher consumption norms increases. Behavior calibrates accordingly. If your peer group discusses investments aggressively, you calibrate upward. If they discuss renovations and vacations, you calibrate toward consumption. Environment is leverage. After 35, changing environment feels destabilizing. So environment solidifies. And solidified environment reinforces spending and stability over acceleration. Now here is the structural reality. High intelligence often correlates with high income. High income often correlates with higher fixed obligations. Higher fixed obligations reduce risk tolerance. Yet reduced risk tolerance limits asymmetric positioning. Asymmetric positioning is required for wealth acceleration. So paradoxically, high intelligence increases fragility if structure is not managed intentionally. This is the trap. Now let's integrate the emotional layer. After 35, failure feels heavier. At 25, failure feels educational. At 40, failure feels reputational. Reputational risk deters experimentation. Experimentation is how wealth curves bend. Without experimentation, growth becomes incremental. Incremental growth does not compress time, and time compression is required after 35. This is where most people quietly accept plateau. They rationalize, "I'm doing fine. Others have it worse. I should be grateful." Gratitude is powerful. But gratitude used as a shield against growth is stagnation disguised as maturity. Now here is the micro cliffhanger. Even when intelligent professionals decide to accelerate, even when they commit to investing more, even when they pursue skill growth, they often overlook one silent destroyer. Lifestyle inflation's twin, decision fatigue's amplifier, environmental pressure's enforcer. It is called social expectation debt, and it compounds invisibly. In the next segment, we will dismantle how social expectation debt locks high earners into financial rigidity, and why breaking it requires psychological detachment few are willing to attempt. There is a form of debt that never appears on a balance sheet. No interest rate, no amortization schedule, no minimum payment notification, and yet it controls decisions more aggressively than any loan. It is social expectation debt. After 35, this liability becomes heavy, not because others explicitly demand from you, but because you have implicitly agreed to a role: the reliable one, the stable one, the successful one, the provider, the consistent achiever. Roles solidify over time, and once a role is socially reinforced, deviation feels destabilizing. Let's dismantle this carefully. When you were younger, experimentation was socially acceptable. Changing cities? Adventurous. Switching careers? Brave. Downsizing lifestyle? Strategic. Was after 35, experimentation becomes suspicious. Switch careers. Why would you risk it now? Move somewhere smaller? Are things okay? Reduce spending publicly? Is something wrong? Even if no one says it directly, you anticipate the reaction. Anticipation alone creates friction. This friction creates inertia. Inertia reinforces stagnation. This is the trap. So social expectation debt manifests in subtle forms: maintaining housing size to match social standing, funding private education because peers do, sustaining lifestyle standards to avoid perceived regression, avoiding career pivots to protect reputation, continuing expensive traditions to preserve identity. Each decision feels minor. Cumulatively, they lock capital. Now, here is the structural problem. Social expectation debt competes with financial velocity. Velocity requires surplus. Expectation requires signaling. Signaling consumes surplus. Surplus fuels asymmetry. Without surplus, asymmetry disappears. And without asymmetry, wealth stagnates. Now integrate decision fatigue. When you are cognitively overloaded, you default to maintaining expectations. Maintaining expectations is easier than renegotiating them. Renegotiation requires conversation. Conversation requires vulnerability. Vulnerability threatens identity. Identity feels fragile after 35. Or so expectations persist. Now consider this model. Imagine two individuals both earning $300,000 annually. Individual A consciously renegotiates social expectations, downsizes slightly, redirects $80,000 annually into aggressive capital formation. Individual B maintains full social signaling alignment, redirects $25,000 annually into investments. After 15 years at 8%, Individual A's surplus compounding alone approaches roughly $2.5 million. Individual B's compounding approaches roughly $750,000. That is a $1.75 million difference driven by expectation management. Not intelligence, not talent, not luck, expectation. This is the invisible leverage. Now here is the psychological distortion. Many professionals interpret meeting expectations as responsibility, and responsibility is virtuous. But responsibility without strategic foresight becomes self-sacrifice of future freedom. You sacrifice future autonomy to preserve present perception. This is not dramatic. It is slow. Now layer environmental pressure. If your environment equates visible growth with success, you will feel pressure to escalate lifestyle as income rises. Escalation feels like progression. But financial progression is not linear. It is threshold-based. You either cross escape velocity, or you orbit maintenance indefinitely, and maintenance feels comfortable until external shock appears. An external shock can be industry disruption, health event, economic recession, corporate restructuring, unexpected obligation. If your structure is optimized for expectation rather than resilience, shock amplifies damage. This is why intelligent people are blindsided. They believe stability equals safety. But stability without liquidity equals fragility. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. Even if you detach from social expectation debt, even if you renegotiate environment, even if you control lifestyle inflation, there is still one economic force that erodes momentum after 35. It is subtle, it is gradual, and it convinces intelligent people that they are progressing while actually slowing. It is lifestyle inflation's psychological cousin, complexity accumulation, and it quietly destroys strategic clarity. In the next segment, we will dismantle how complexity accumulation after 35 reduces execution capacity, increases financial noise, and prevents decisive capital deployment, keeping intelligent professionals trapped in moderate outcomes. After 35, most people do not fail because of one catastrophic mistake. They fail because their life becomes too complex to redesign. Complexity accumulation is the gradual stacking of obligations, systems, subscriptions, investments, or commitments, and identities until clarity disappears. And without clarity, execution weakens. This is the silent destroyer. Let's define complexity in financial terms. Complexity is the number of moving parts you must manage to maintain stability. Examples: multiple financial accounts with overlapping strategies, scattered investments without clear thesis alignment, properties that require constant oversight, business ventures without operational leverage, debt instruments with varying rates and timelines, high-maintenance lifestyle assets, layered family commitments tied to spending structures. None of these individually destructive, collectively exhausting. After 35, energy capital begins to matter more. If complexity consumes cognitive bandwidth, your capacity for strategic acceleration declines. You are busy maintaining, not building. This is where intelligent professionals miscalculate again. They equate complexity with sophistication. But sophistication without simplification reduces velocity. Velocity requires focus. Focus requires simplicity. Let's examine the economic effect. Imagine a professional earning $350,000 annually. They own 2 rental properties requiring oversight. They have equity in a small partnership business demanding quarterly decisions. They maintain an aggressive corporate role with high stress. They manage a diversified but fragmented investment portfolio. They sit on nonprofit boards. They manage family logistics in a high-consumption environment. Each commitment reduces available strategic thinking time. Strategic thinking time is the scarcest resource after 35. Without it, capital deployment becomes reactive rather than intentional. Now layer this with opportunity recognition. Opportunities rarely announce themselves clearly. They appear in subtle signals, emerging industries, shifting market inefficiencies, new leverage platforms. To recognize them, you need cognitive space. Complexity eliminates space. When space disappears, you default to existing commitments. Existing commitments anchor you in present trajectory. Present trajectory may be moderate. Moderate compounds into plateau. This is the structural danger. Now let's introduce decision friction cost. Every additional financial structure adds micro-decisions. Micro-decisions consume attention. Attention fragmentation reduces deep work. Deep work drives asymmetry. Without asymmetry, wealth curves flatten. This is not abstract, it is measurable. Studies consistently show that high cognitive load reduces risk evaluation accuracy and future-oriented planning capacity. If your life architecture is overloaded, your investment decisions become conservative. Conservative decisions delay thresholds. Threshold delays reduce optionality. Optionality reduction increases anxiety. Anxiety increases comfort spending. Comfort spending reinforces mistake number 1. This is how mistakes interlock. Now, here is the psychological layer. Complexity creates the illusion of progress. You feel productive because you're busy. You feel diversified because you own multiple assets. You feel engaged because you're constantly managing. But busyness is not velocity. Diversification without concentration is not acceleration. Engagement without leverage is not growth. After 35, simplicity becomes a strategic advantage. The wealthiest individuals in modern economic systems often operate through concentrated bets layered over diversified foundations, not scattered micro-commitments draining focus. Now let's quantify focus advantage. Assume 2 individuals both earning $400,000 annually. Individual A simplifies structure. Single primary residence. 1 or 2 scalable investment theses. A high liquidity buffer. Focused skill expansion. Minimal non-core commitments. They redirect 30% of mental bandwidth toward capital architecture. Individual B maintains multiple fragmented obligations. Their strategic bandwidth is diluted. Over 10 years, Individual A identifies and executes 2 asymmetric opportunities, producing additional 7-figure upside. Individual B maintains moderate returns. The difference is not intelligence, it is clarity. So now here is the structural declaration. After 35, success is less about adding more. It is about subtracting noise, subtracting commitments that do not compound, subtracting ego-driven obligations, subtracting financial structures that create maintenance drag. Subtraction increases acceleration. Most people add complexity as income rises. Few subtract intentionally. This is why intelligent professionals plateau. Now here is the micro cliffhanger that matters. You now understand the 3 lethal mistakes: scaling lifestyle faster than structure, identity-based financial self-sabotage, underestimating exponential math and opportunity decay. But awareness alone changes nothing. Correction requires blueprint. In the next section, we will build the strategic wealth blueprint for after 35, step by step. Capital structure, asset acquisition logic, risk mitigation architecture, skill stacking integration, cash flow engineering, long-term asymmetry positioning. This is where theory becomes system. And this is where trajectories bend permanently. Now we shift from diagnosis to architecture. No more identifying traps. Now we build. After 35, wealth building is no longer about experimenting randomly. It is about engineering compression. Compression of time. Compression of effort. Compression of inefficiency. This is the decade where structure determines the rest of your life. Not effort, structure. Let's begin with the core principle. After 35, your financial system must become intentional, not habitual. Most people operate on financial autopilot. Autopilot works in accumulation phases when time is abundant. It fails in compression phases when time is finite. The strategic wealth blueprint consists of 5 layers: capital control velocity engines, risk architecture, skill stack, integration asymmetry, positionings build in sequence, because sequence determines sustainability. Layer 1. Capital control. Before you accelerate, you must control flow. Control does not mean restriction. It means clarity. You cannot deploy capital strategically if you do not know precisely how much is deployable. After 35, your first objective is to calculate your true investable surplus, not your savings rate, not your leftover balance, your strategic surplus. Strategic surplus equals net income minus essential expenses, baseline lifestyle, risk buffer allocation. Most people overestimate surplus because they include optional spending as fixed, or underestimate because they assume income volatility. Clarity removes distortion. Once surplus is identified, allocation becomes mathematical. Now we define allocation ratios for compression phase, ages 35 to 45 approximately. 40 to 50%. Core compounding, broad diversified exposure, 20 to 30%. Acceleration capital, growth-focused allocation, 10 to 20% asymmetric bets, 10 to 20% liquidity and optionality reserve. These percentages flex based on risk tolerance and fixed cost ratio. But the principle remains. Core protects. Acceleration grows. Asymmetry multiplies. Liquidity preserves maneuverability. Without liquidity, leverage becomes dangerous. Without asymmetry, acceleration slows. Without core, risk overwhelms. Now, here is the first structural shift. Your savings rate after 35 should feel aggressive. If it feels comfortable, it is insufficient. Because comfort at this stage delays escape velocity. Most professionals save 10 to 20%. Compression often requires 30 to 40% of gross income. Yes, this demands restructuring. Yes, it requires expectation renegotiation. Yes, it requires lifestyle stabilization. But without compression, exponential math remains slow. Now let's move to the second layer. Layer 2. Velocity engines. One engine is not enough. After 35, you need at least 2 capital engines running simultaneously. Engine 1. Earned income scaling engine. 2. Asset income scaling. Earned income scaling is not about working more hours. It is about increasing income per unit of energy. This requires skill stacking. We will address that shortly. Asset income scaling is about building cash flow that does not require daily labor. This can include dividend-producing equities, cash-flowing real estate, equity in scalable ventures, digital asset leverage, structured business ownership, The key is reinvestment. Asset income must not fund lifestyle prematurely. It must fuel engine expansion. This is where most people sabotage velocity. They see first cash flow and celebrate by upgrading lifestyle. But no. Asset income in compression phase is reinvestment fuel. Now let's model dual engine impact. Assume you earn $300,000 and redirect $90,000 annually toward capital. Simultaneously, your assets generate $30,000 in passive income by year 5. If reinvested, this accelerates capital threshold crossing dramatically. If consumed, velocity slows. This is discipline, not austerity. Sequencing. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. Most people understand saving and investing. So few understand risk architecture at this stage. Because risk after 35 is not about volatility. It is about fragility. In the next segment, we build risk mitigation structure so acceleration does not collapse under shock. Acceleration without protection is gambling. Protection without acceleration is stagnation. After 35, your wealth system must be anti-fragile, not merely stable. Anti-fragile systems improve under stress. Fragile systems collapse under stress. Most professionals unknowingly build fragile wealth structures because they focus on returns instead of resilience. This is where the blueprint becomes surgical. First principle: liquidity is not laziness. Liquidity is leverage waiting for opportunity. Most high earners after 35 make one of two mistakes. They either hold too little liquidity because they are fully invested, or they hold too much liquidity because they fear volatility. Both are distortions. The correct model is tiered liquidity. Tier 1, 6 to 12 months essential expenses, true emergency buffer. Tier 2, opportunity capital, deployable cash for asymmetric opportunities. Tier 3, core long-term investments not intended for short-term withdrawal. Without Tier 2 liquidity, you miss asymmetric windows. Without Tier 1 liquidity, you panic during downturns. Panic destroys compounding. Now let's address leverage. Leverage amplifies returns. It also amplifies collapse. After 35, leverage must be used selectively and only when 3 conditions are met. Cash flow coverage ratio above 1.5 times, liquidity buffer intact asset has durable demand tailwinds. For example, leveraging into real estate can compress time if rental cash flow exceeds costs and demographic demand supports valuation. But leveraging into depreciating assets or speculative instruments is velocity suicide. The rule is simple. Use leverage for productive assets, never for lifestyle assets. This is where many professionals sabotage structure. They use leverage to scale homes, vehicles, renovations. Lifestyle leverage creates permanent fixed drag. Productive leverage creates scalable income. Now let's examine risk concentration. After 35, income concentration risk is high. Many professionals rely on one employer, one industry, one geography. If disruption hits, collapse is severe. Risk architecture requires income diversification. Not necessarily multiple full-time roles, but optional income channels, advisory roles, consulting frameworks, equity participation, skill-based monetization, revenue sharing agreements. Income diversification reduces shock impact. Shock reduction protects compounding timeline. Timeline protection preserves exponential slope. Now, here is the structural declaration. Your primary risk after 35 is not market volatility. It is income disruption. Most people fear stock market fluctuations. Few fear career obsolescence. Career obsolescence is the greater threat. Therefore, risk architecture must prioritize income durability. Now, layer psychological resilience. If volatility causes emotional instability, your allocation is misaligned. Your portfolio must allow you to sleep. Sleep preserves cognition. Cognition preserves decision quality. Decision quality preserves wealth. Risk architecture is not about maximizing theoretical return. It is about maximizing sustained execution capacity. Now let's introduce stress testing. After 35, you must model worst-case scenarios. Income drops 30% for 2 years. Market declines 40%. Major unexpected expense arises. Health disruption reduces productivity. If your structure collapses under simulation, redesign is required. Most people never simulate fragility. They assume continuity is a narrative. Shock is reality. Now here is the micro cliffhanger. Even with capital control, even with velocity engines, even with risk architecture, your wealth system will underperform if skill capital is static, because income expansion funds acceleration. In the next segment, we integrate skill stacking into wealth architecture, not as career advice, as capital engineering. Most people treat skills as career tools. After 35, the skills must become capital multipliers. There is a difference. A career tool helps you perform your job. A capital multiplier increases your income per unit of energy and expands ownership leverage. After 35, the objective is not just to be competent. It is to become economically asymmetric. Asymmetry in skill capital means your effort produces disproportionate financial return. Let's break this down. So skill stacking is the deliberate layering of complementary competencies that amplify earning power. Example: a corporate executive with operational expertise who adds financial literacy, negotiation mastery, and digital distribution knowledge becomes exponentially more valuable. An engineer who adds product strategy and communication leverage increases leadership potential. A medical professional who adds business ownership frameworks multiplies income beyond salary constraints. The formula is simple. Primary skill plus scarce adjacent skill plus leverage channel equals income compression. Now let's quantify. Assume a professional earns $220,000. By stacking an adjacent high-demand skill, for example, AI integration, digital systems design, strategic consulting, earning potential increases to $350,000 to $450,000 over several years. If the additional $130,000 annually is redirected toward capital acceleration for 10 years at 8%, that alone compounds into roughly $2 million. Yes, skill stacking is not ego-driven self-improvement. It is strategic capital engineering. Now, here is the deeper insight. After 35, you are no longer competing on raw energy. You compete on leverage. Leverage amplifies output without proportional time increase. Forms of leverage include technology, capital, network, media distribution, intellectual property. Skill stacking must aim at one or more of these leverage channels. If your income model is purely time for money, your ceiling is fixed by biology. Biology declines slowly after 35. Therefore, time-based income becomes less scalable. Leverage-based income becomes essential. Now integrate this with risk architecture. If your income grows 3% annually through standard promotion cycles, compounding remains slow. If skill stacking allows 10 to 15% growth bursts during key transitions, your capital curve steepens dramatically. Steeper curve crosses thresholds earlier. Earlier thresholds expand optionality. Optionality reduces stress. Reduced stress improves cognition. Cognition improves decision quality. Decision quality reinforces wealth. This is the compounding loop. Now let's address identity resistance again. Many professionals after 35 resist skill reinvention because they feel established. They believe additional training signals inadequacy. This is ego, and ego is expensive. The most dangerous phrase after 35 is, "I already know enough." No. The economy is evolving faster than ever. Skill half-life is shortening. If you do not upgrade deliberately, the market downgrades you passively. Now, here is the structural sequencing. During 35 to 45 compression phase, allocate 10 to 20% of time to skill expansion. Allocate 30 to 40% of surplus capital to acceleration, tech liquidity. Pursue one asymmetric bet at a time, not 10. 1. La concentration with discipline. This prevents complexity accumulation. Now, here is the micro cliffhanger. You now understand capital control, velocity engines, risk architecture, and skill stacking. But one final element determines whether this blueprint sustains long-term dominance. Asymmetry positioning. Most people chase returns. Few position for inevitabilities. In the next segment, we will dismantle long-term asymmetry thinking. How to identify structural trends, demographic shifts, and economic forces that reward those who align early and punish those who react late. This is where strategy transcends tactics. Tactics build income. Positioning builds inevitability. After 35, you cannot rely on short-term tactics alone. You must align with forces larger than yourself. This is asymmetry positioning. Asymmetry exists when upside potential significantly outweighs downside risk due to structural inevitability. Not hype. Not speculation. Inevitability. Most professionals approach investing reactively. They chase recent performance. They follow headlines. They respond to volatility emotionally. This is tactical thinking. Asymmetry thinking asks a different question. What macro forces are already in motion that will likely persist for decades? Because aligning with structural trends reduces friction. Now let's define structural forces that historically create asymmetry. Demographic shifts, technological transformation, capital flow migration, regulatory realignment, energy transition, digital infrastructure expansion, healthcare demand growth, global supply chain restructuring. These are not short-term themes. They are multi-decade currents. If you align capital and skill with these currents, compounding becomes smoother. If you ignore them, you swim upstream. Now, here is the critical distinction. Asymmetry does not mean betting your entire net worth on one theme. It means allocating controlled capital toward high-probability structural trends early enough to benefit from exponential adoption. For example, when digital infrastructure expanded, early equity holders multiplied capital dramatically. When mobile ecosystems matured, aligned investors captured compounding returns. When e-commerce logistics expanded, positioned operators benefited disproportionately. The principle is consistent. Position early in durable shifts. Reinvest gains aggressively. Avoid lifestyle leakage. Now integrate this with your 35 to 45 compression phase. You do not need 10 asymmetric bets. You need 1 or 2 intelligently selected exposures aligned with long-term inevitabilities. This reduces complexity, increases focus, maximizes learning. Now here is the second layer of asymmetry. Ownership over salary caps upside. Ownership expands upside. Ownership may mean equity in a business, profit-sharing agreements, revenue participation models, intellectual property rights, digital product ecosystems, scalable consulting frameworks. The goal is not to abandon stability recklessly. The goal is to layer ownership gradually until labor becomes optional. Now, here is the structural reality. After 35, though many professionals are in positions where they create disproportionate value but capture only a fraction through salary. Negotiating equity, profit participation, or strategic upside exposure is critical. If your value creation multiplies organizational output, but your compensation remains fixed, you are subsidizing someone else's asymmetry. That is acceptable temporarily, not indefinitely. Now let's integrate risk management. Asymmetry must be sized appropriately. Never allocate capital you cannot emotionally tolerate losing. Asymmetric bets should be funded by surplus, not necessity. Surplus protects composure. Composure protects discipline. Discipline protects compounding. Now here is the strategic declaration. Your objective after 35 is to build inevitability into your wealth curve. Inevitability emerges when core capital compounds steadily, accelerationed capital grows aggressively, asymmetric exposure multiplies selectively, skill, capital expands income slope, liquidity preserves maneuverability. When these systems align, trajectory bends. But this is only blueprint phase. Execution requires timing discipline. Acceleration must be intentional, not constant. In the next section, we enter the acceleration phase, where we integrate income engines, asset engines, a leverage discipline, and timing windows into a unified strategy designed specifically for post-35 wealth compression. This is where compounding becomes visible. Now we enter the phase most people never design deliberately. Acceleration, not accumulation, not stabilization, acceleration. After 35, time is finite enough that passive participation is insufficient. But it is abundant enough that aggressive positioning still compounds massively. This decade, roughly 35 to 45, is the ignition corridor. If you compress here, your 40s and 50s become leverage years. If you drift here, your 40s become maintenance years. And maintenance rarely produces freedom. Let's begin with the core structure of acceleration: dual engine dominance. You must run two engines simultaneously and intentionally. Engine 1, income expansion. Engine 2, asset multiplication engine. Most people rely on one at a time. They either focus entirely on career, or they obsess entirely over investments. Acceleration requires synchronization. Now let's break this down. Engine 1, income expansion. After 35, income expansion is not about incremental raises. It is about slope alteration. Slope alteration means changing the trajectory of earnings growth from linear to stepwise. Linear growth, 3 to 5% annually. Stepwise growth, 20 to 50% jumps at strategic intervals. A stepwise growth happens when you transition roles strategically. You stack skills into scarce combinations. You negotiate equity or profit participation. You enter high-growth sectors early. You design scalable revenue channels. This is not job hopping impulsively. This is strategic repositioning. Now, quantify impact. If your income grows from $250,000 to $400,000 over 5 years, instead of drifting to $290,000, that additional $110,000 annually, invested aggressively, compounds into millions over 2 decades. Income slope change multiplies capital acceleration. But here is the constraint. Income expansion must not inflate lifestyle. If income expansion fuels consumption instead of investment, acceleration collapses. Therefore, during acceleration phase, income increases must be largely captured, not celebrated. Celebration comes after thresholds are crossed. Now we layer Engine 2. Engine 2. Asset multiplication. Asset multiplication is not just investing more. It is designing asset exposure to grow faster than your effort. This includes broad equity compounding, cash-flowing real estate with durable demand, equity in scalable ventures, structured partnerships, digital leverage assets. But here is the critical rule. Asset multiplication must be reinvestment heavy. Cash flow generated must feed engine expansion, not lifestyle expansion. This is sequencing discipline. Now let's model dual engine synergy. Scenario: at 36, you earn $300,000. You redirect $120,000 annually into capital. You reposition career and increase income to $450,000 by 41. You maintain lifestyle stability and redirect $200,000 annually. By 45, assuming disciplined compounding and selective asymmetric exposure, capital may approach $2 to $3 million depending on returns. At $3 million, even conservative 6 to 8% returns generate $180,000 to $240,000 annually. A labor becomes optional. Optionality creates power. Power creates strategic calm. Strategic calm produces better decisions. Better decisions compound. Now here is the psychological tension. Acceleration phase feels uncomfortable. You will feel like you're delaying gratification while peers celebrate. You will feel like you're working harder without visible reward. You will question whether compression is necessary. This is normal. But remember, acceleration is temporary. Maintenance without acceleration is permanent. Now here is the micro cliffhanger. Dual engines alone are insufficient. Because acceleration without control leads to burnout or reckless leverage. The next critical element is optionality strategy. How to increase upside without increasing fragility. Because acceleration must be sustainable. At some point in your late 30s, something shifts quietly. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is a realization. So you're no longer building for potential. You're building for outcome. The runway is still long, but no longer infinite. The decisions you make now do not merely influence your lifestyle. They define your trajectory. And trajectory, once set, compounds without negotiation. This is the moment most people hesitate. They understand the math. They recognize the traps. They feel the pressure of time compression. But they do nothing radical. They adjust slightly. And they optimize marginally. They remain structurally similar. And 10 years later, they are stable, comfortable, respected, and quietly constrained. This is the silent plateau. Not failure, not collapse, but capped potential. You were not meant for capped potential. After 35, the game is not about proving yourself. It is about positioning yourself. Not about appearing successful, but becoming structurally powerful. Not about earning more, but needing less from effort. Not about security, but about sovereignty. Sovereignty is the ultimate wealth, the ability to choose, to walk away, to pivot, to invest when others hesitate, to refuse environments that no longer serve you, to design your time intentionally, to operate from calm, not pressure. This does not happen by accident. It happens by compression, by refusing to inflate lifestyle prematurely, by detaching identity from consumption, by respecting exponential math, by crossing capital thresholds early, by stacking skills that amplify income per unit of energy, by building dual engines, by controlling leverage, by protecting optionality, by subtracting complexity, by aligning with inevitability. This is not extreme. It is strategic. And here is the uncomfortable truth. You do not need more time. You need more clarity. Most people waste the 35 to 45 decade protecting comfort. The few who compress it build inevitability. Just imagine yourself 10 years from now. Not the fantasy version, the structural version. You wake up. Income from assets covers a significant portion, or all, of your living costs. Work becomes a choice. Negotiations shift. You speak differently. You tolerate less. You think longer term. You move strategically. There is no panic in downturns, no desperation in transitions, no fear in opportunity windows, because structure protects you. Now imagine the alternative. Use income plateaued, expenses fixed high, investments moderate, optionality thin. You work not because you choose to, but because you must. You hope markets cooperate. You hope your industry remains stable. You hope nothing disrupts your path. Hope is not strategy. Structure is. This is your inflection point, not because of age, but because of awareness. You now see the invisible architecture. You see the 3 mistakes: lifestyle expansion before asset acceleration, identity preservation over repositioning, underestimating exponential math and opportunity decay. You see the blueprint: capital control, velocity engines, risk architecture, skill stacking, asymmetry positioning, dual engine acceleration, optionality discipline, identity evolution, wealth redefinition. Now the question is not whether you understand, the question is whether you act. Because knowledge without restructuring is self-deception. And self-deception after 35 is expensive. You do not need to become extreme. You need to become deliberate. Audit your lifestyle lock-in ratio. Increase your savings rate aggressively. Redirect income growth toward capital, not consumption. Stack 1 new skill aligned with structural inevitability. Add 1 scalable asset engine. Build liquidity beyond comfort. Remove 1 complexity burden. Renegotiate 1 expectation. Take 1 asymmetric position thoughtfully sized. And 1 action compounds. 1 year compounds. 1 decade transforms. This is the decade that decides whether your 40s feel expansive or compressed, whether your 50s feel powerful or pressured, whether your 60s feel chosen or tolerated. There will never be a perfect moment. There will never be unanimous support. There will never be certainty. There will only be structure or drift. Choose structure. Choose compression. Choose inevitability. Because after 35, the most expensive mistake is not failure. It is staying comfortable long enough to realize you could have been free. Act before the slope hardens. Build before the window narrows. Design before the system decides for you. And remember this: freedom is not earned at retirement. It is engineered in your 30s and 40s.